turn to Romans chapter 8. As we continue to look through this passage of Scripture, we come to one of the harder sections of the text, because after an emotional, for me anyway, sermon last week, talking about all that we have in the Spirit, I mean that of all the people in the world, God chose you to be His son, to be His daughter. That's something that has just stuck with me all week. The natural question comes up. Well, if that's true, and God has given me all of this blessing, all of these promises, then why do I still hurt? Why do I still have suffering, trials, hardships in this world? It's a question that is asked of pastors almost every week. Probably the most frequent question I've been asked in the last 30 years of being a pastor is, why do bad things happen? Not only to good people, but why do bad things just happen? We just took a little survey this morning. And I want you to understand, as Jimmy Abernathy always says, we're more alike than we are different. Just listen to some of the trials that we've gone through. I told you could only use one, but I'm going to use three. When I look back on my life, 3 significant events have occurred and are occurring. We had a wreck several years ago that almost claimed the life of my wife and my children. That was a trial that lasted and continues to last. My mother passed away this year. My father has cancer. We had difficulties. Others have put the death of my wife, living with my past sins, because I'm always reminded that I'm not good enough to serve. I lost my daughter. I lost my parents. My daughter's on drugs. Losing my son. Losing 2 of my children. Losing my son who passed away. Balancing all of life's demands. The death of my grandmother. The death of a family member. Leaving the church that we were at. My grandmother died. Struggling in school socially. Losing a best friend at the same time. My marriage. Infertility. Losing a friend in high school. My work. Becoming an adult and learning how to deal with what goes with that. My family after my brother's death. My mother has cancer. The loss of my wife. We all struggle. We all have difficulties. We all suffer. We all have trials. And the question becomes, why? If God has given us all these great promises that we've seen in Romans chapter 8, 1 through 17, why does a loving God allow us to suffer? Why does a loving God allow sickness? Why does a loving God allow a teenager to have cancer? Why does a loving God allow a teenager to be facing yet another surgery this week? Why does a loving God allow such things? We need to really stop and ask ourselves the question, because it's a tough question. And what we find out is that although Romans 8 touches on this, it doesn't give us a comprehensive view. But we want to learn what Paul is teaching us about why trials, why suffering. And I encourage you to look with me at the text there in Romans chapter 8. I'm looking for my glasses so that I can read the text. And all the stuff that's up here, you'd think I have glasses. I'm going to read it without glasses, and so if I miss a word, forgive me, because I'm doing this by memory. I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation, of the creature. My daughter found them. Hallelujah. For the earnest expectation of the creation, of the creature, waited for the manifestation of the sons of God. For the creation, or the creature, was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who has subjected it the same in hope. Because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth and paineth together until now. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. For we are saved by hope. But hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? But if we hope for that which we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. Then he goes on, and we'll touch on this next Sunday. Likewise, the Spirit also helps in our infirmity. For we know not what we should pray for as we ought. But the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings that cannot be uttered. And he that searcheth the heart knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of God. Every one of us will go through trials. Every one of us will go through hurt. Every one of us struggle in this life. And the question that Paul comes naturally to begin to answer is, after we see all of these promises that God has given to us, we need to stop and look realistically at where we're at. It's no fuzzy statistic. Every one of us will die. Every one. In fact, I can only name 2 people in the entire history of the world that has not died. Our modern culture says, since we're going to die, and because all we are is the product of evolution and chance, that we might as well live it up. Get all the gusto out of life that you can. You only go around once, so you might as well enjoy it. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul even addresses this same humanistic, materialistic philosophy, where he says, if the dead are not raised, then eat and drink, because tomorrow you might die. But he goes on to correct us. He says, but because Jesus has been raised from the dead, then the dead will be raised. And if the dead are raised, then we should be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that our labor is not in vain. But as we do that, as we look at life, we need to stop and understand why there's suffering in the world. And what the text has told us is that the present time is marked by suffering because of sin. Notice it there in verse 18. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time, now let's stop for a second, because he's not talking about a particular time in history. He's just saying that the history of the world, since the fall of Adam and Eve, since sin entered into the world, has been subject to suffering. When you look at the history of nations, what you find is struggles and catastrophes and wars and disasters and conflict and power struggles and crime. That's what you see. In the United States alone last year, there were 11 different natural disasters that claimed so many lives that they were listed by NOAA as a natural, true disaster, not including all of the local floods and earthquakes and everything that occurred. When we stop and we look at the crime and violence in our cities and even in our own neighborhood, this past week we had a murder-suicide in Lenore. We've had shootings and deaths in Hickory. We're not exempt because we are in the South and because we are relatively in a small area. We have the same problems as everybody else. The history, the time that he's talking about here, is the history of the world. It's marked by suffering. And even in our individual lives, as we've just read, our individual histories are marked by times of trials. But why? Why do we suffer? Why do Christians, good people, go through hard times? He tells us in verse 18 to verse 22 that the entire creation groans because of man's fall in sin. Just listen to this rendering of the text. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its slavery to the corruption into freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. What Paul does is he kind of personifies all of creation. And what he's saying is, because of sin, because of the fall, the entire world is broken. In fact, in my text of my Bible, that is the thing that I've just written across the top of this verse, is that there's 3 big dots in life, and what we find in these dots is that the entire world is broken because of sin. And what the creation is waiting for, is longing for, is for all of the promises that God has given to us as His children to be completely revealed. Because when it is completely revealed, then even the creation itself will be subjected to not corruption, but to glory. When you stop and begin to look in Genesis at the account of the fall, because of the sin of Adam, God's judgment included all of creation. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil and in sweat you'll eat of it all the days of your lives. Both thorns and thistles will grow where you plow. And I've told this church many times, I've got the best illustration of this. Growing up in the mountains, we lived right on the side of a mountain. And what the people that lived there before us did is that they made a garden on the side of a mountain. The way they did is they terraced it down like this. And it terraces down and goes off into the woods. We had put barbed wire around the garden, and we tilled the land. We plowed the land. We planted all kinds of fruits and vegetables and things on those terraces. And my job as a teenager was to go in, because everywhere we plowed, guess what came up? Thorns and thistles. And there is a dividing line where that barbed wire fence is. From that point over, it's nothing but thorns and thistles. And I have to take out a big weed eater, and I have to chop all that stuff down every day. In fact, as we get a little bit colder, if anybody wants to go up and help me clear that place off again, it needs it again really, really bad. So we'll have to work, then you can come help me. But you can stand just like this. On this side where we've plowed thorns and thistles, on this side where man's never touched, is a beautiful forest. And that's what he's saying. And even as we look beyond that part of creation, when we look into the world of the animals and things like that, we find that today is marked by death, by disease, and by survival of the fittest. You stop and you begin to look at the animal channel and all of these creation channels and things like that, and you'll find where the sharks are eating this for dinner and where the lions are taking down this prey for dinner. There's coming a day, Isaiah says, where the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together. There's coming a day when the curse will be lifted. And what Paul is telling us is that trials and suffering and death and disease and hurt were not part of the original creation. The Bible teaches us that this entire world is broken. Listen to me very carefully. Not by design, but rather by disobedience. The world is broken not because it's a bad design. God said it was all good. The world is broken because of man's disobedience. Death was not part of the original creation. As you stop and you look at God's creation, even marred by sin, you can't help but see the glory and the majesty of the Creator that spoke this world into existence. We sat out under the stars on Friday night in hammocks again. Tim, I was strung up between two trees again. And just looked at God's creation. And I thought of David saying, "Behold, the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse declares the work of His hand." And as beautiful as it is, even today, it is marked by sin. And because sin has came into this world because of man's disobedience, every human being will suffer the consequences of sin. Death comes to us all. You stop and you look at the author, physical author of the book of Romans, the man that was marked by suffering. In fact, after he'd gotten saved, he was told that God would reveal to him how he would suffer for the cause of Christ. Even our beloved Lord and Savior was a man of sorrows, well acquainted with grief. If Christ was a man of sorrows, if the great apostle Paul was a man of trials, how could we ever think that we would be able to escape the consequences of sin? And because each one of us are there, and we have the notes to prove it, how should we look at the issue of sufferings in our life? Will we grow through it, or will we be destroyed because of it? Paul's opening in verse 18 being a good Southerner that he is, says, "For I reckon." I love that word. Paul's word simply means to consider, to think deeply about. What he's saying is that as I think deeply about creation, as I think deeply about all of the promises that God has given to me and to us, I want to carefully, biblically think about suffering. And Paul wants us to know 4 things. I think that they are so important that I've written them in your notes, and they're right here in the middle of this back page. Something that we need to see and understand. First, our present sufferings are relatively short compared to the eternal glory that we will share in heaven with Christ. 70 years, toil and striving cannot be compared to the weight of eternal glory that God has given to us. The second is that when you stop and you begin to look not only at the time but the weight, when we see that our present sufferings are relatively small, they can't compare to the tons of glory that God has revealed and will give to us. He would write to the Corinthian church, "I do not lose heart. Even though the outer man is decaying, our inner man is being renewed day by day." Listen to it. "For our momentarily light affliction is producing for us the eternal weight of glory far beyond comparison. While we look at things which are seen, while we look not at things which are seen, but at things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen, they are eternal." See, a biblical perspective of our suffering is that it's short, and that it doesn't weigh an awful lot when you compare that to the eternal glory that we will have with Christ when He gives to us our full inheritance. He tells us that our future glory is absolutely certain. See, that's kind of what started all of this, is that we have been given this hope that the Holy Spirit has adopted us into the family of God, that we are now joint heirs with Christ. And even though we suffer, as Peter says, for a short time, it cannot compare to what God is going to do in our lives when our full inheritance is revealed. That's why Peter would say that I have an inheritance that's incorruptible, that's undefiled, that will never pass away, that's being reserved in heaven for me. See, the problem is that we haven't received our full inheritance yet. And the entire creation is waiting for just that moment. Now, this is not part of the text that we're looking at, but would you look back down at your Bible at verse 28? And you knew that we would get to this verse. We're going to touch on it for just a second. We'll deal with it in 2 weeks. "And we know that all things work together for good, to them that love God, to them that are called according to His purpose. For whom He did foreknow, He also did predestine to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren." You see, the fourth thing in our biblical view of suffering is this, that even in our suffering, even in our trials, even in our struggles, God is working everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything, to our good. Because His plan for me right here, right now, is that I am to be growing in conformity to the very image of the Son of God that saved me. And God is taking and weaving the tapestry of my life, the good, the beautiful, the bad, the ugly, and He's weaving that into my life so that I learn to depend on Him, trust in Him, and act like Him. So the fourth point is that God is using even our trials to conform us to the image of God. And because of all of this, what you need to understand is that the fact of suffering will never, ever impede or undermine in any way the plan that God has for your life right here, right now, and the plans that God has for you in eternal glory. See, we often don't see that while we're going through suffering. All we see is the fact that the doctor's report says it's cancer. All we see is the casket that's at the front of the church. All we see is the trials and the heartaches and the hardships that we're going through. And we lose the perspective of eternity because of the thorns of the suffering that we're going through. And what Paul is saying to us, guys, listen, it's not over. He wants us to remove that foliage out from in front of our face and look to Jesus Christ, who's given to us the promise that one day I will receive all that He has promised. Paul says that the creation, in verse 20, was subjected to futility. Not willingly, but listen, in hope. And I love the way that he paints this picture in verse 22. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in birth pains together until now. And just like when the birth pains begin, the child is born. What he's saying is, God is moving history to a goal that includes our future glory. Now listen very carefully, because the future that God has for us is a future that fulfills every promise that he's ever given to one of his children. We've seen so many of these promises in Romans chapter 8, but just listen to a couple of them. My future glory is not totally revealed to me yet, but it includes everything that God has promised. And when he gives that promise to me, it will include the full renewal of creation to its original purpose, perfection and purpose one. Genesis chapter 1 to Genesis chapter 2, God created it. In Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, God created it. Without sin, man was placed into the garden so that he could glorify and worship his Creator. In Genesis chapter 3, sin entered into the world. And because sin came into the world, death came by sin. But even in that very chapter, he gave to us a promise that there was coming a day when a Messiah would come and he would pay the debt of man's sin. And the rest of the entire Bible is the story and the unfolding picture of how God is going to take that which was born by sin. In Revelation 21 and 22, he ends by saying, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. All these old things, they passed away. Listen, no more death. Amen. No more sickness. Amen. I mean, no more doctor's visits and no more funeral home visits. Wouldn't that be glorious? No more interpersonal rivalry. No more struggle. No more conflict. For all will be perfect. I love what one author wrote. As we are growing closer and closer to the Lord, being conformed into his image by the Holy Spirit's guidance, we are able not to sin. But there is coming a day in glory when we will not be able to sin. Now, I don't know if you caught the subtle words that were there, but boy, that's profound. As I grow in my relationship to the Lord by the Spirit's leading, I am able not to sin. But there's coming a day that I will not be able to sin. Listen to me, guys. That future possession is guaranteed by our present possession of the Holy Spirit. He tells us here in this text that we are the first fruits of what God has given to us. The indwelling of the Holy Spirit is God's guarantee that every promise that he has ever given to you, it will not be thwarted. It will come to fruition. If we stop and we begin to look at where we're at in life, and when we stop and look at the struggles that we face in life, we can count on the promises of God. So I want you to stop and just notice the conclusion. Look there at verse 24. And I wish that we could stop and just deal with this in great length, because these two verses are so close. In verse 24 it says, likewise, for we are saved by hope. But hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why does he yet hope for? But if we hope for that which we see, now watch, then do we with patience wait for it. What he's saying is, we need to get a perspective. Don't get so caught up in all of the suffering that's here. Our perspective should be this. Keep your eyes fixed on the promises of God, the future glory that he has promised, the indwelling spirit that he guarantees that promise with, and persevere with patience, verse 26 says, with hope. You know, I love racing. Every Sunday afternoon, when you guys were home watching it, I was here not being able to. What I would do is I would take my little DVR recorder and I would record it. And the only rule on Sunday night for a very long time in our church was you cannot say anything about the race. You want to know why? because I had favorites. Kyle Busch isn't one of them. And what I heard last night, he didn't have a good night anyway. That's a hallelujah, praise the Lord. And that was the only rule in our church because I had favorites. And I wanted to be able to go home after church, flip on my television, and watch with anticipation what might unfold. And early on, my driver would spin out. Early on, there would be a problem or an issue. And I would sit on the edge of my seat wondering, just to let you know, will Jeff Gordon win? Don't throw stuff at me. Will he win? I always loved Kyle. I always loved Wayne because he would walk in the door, first thing he would say was, lap 167 was great, which meant Kyle Rex on lap 167. But you know, there were times where you guys would come into the church on Sunday night and defy the pastor, and you would be sitting there talking about what a great race it was and how back and forth it was. But at the very end, whoever won. And I would go, oh, don't tell me that. Why? Because if I knew that my driver won the race, I don't care what happened in the first 499 laps, do you? He could have spun out at lap 2, but I knew he won the race, so I would just sit back and eat my chocolate chip cookies and drink my coffee, just sit there and, you know, he's going to come back. And that's what he's saying. We know the ending. We know what's going to occur. Paul has told us that we are living under no condemnation, and one day, because I'm part of God's family, every promise will be found true. And because I know the end, I have hope. And it's not a hope like, I hope my driver wins. It's a hope like, I know the outcome. And I have a confidence. I think one of the things that sets Christians apart is how we face struggles and trials and difficulties. My wife's not with us this morning. She's back with the children, so I'll tell this story. Several years ago, her father, after a lengthy illness, passed away. Being the husband of widow, I thought, well, I'll need to go and comfort her and be strong for her, for the family. We drove up. We got there just in time to be able to say goodbye to Dad, and then he passed away. And I watched with utter amazement at that family who knew the Lord, knew His promises, stood around the casket. Yes, they wept, and yes, they cried. But the only thing that I heard was, He's in heaven with his Lord. I get to see Him again. And even at the funeral, there were smiles. There was laughter. After the first year, on the anniversary of his death, I still have his obituary on my desk at work. I thought, well, it's coming up. It's 2 days away. I need to buy her flowers or something, to try to help her through this. And the day came, and I expected maybe because of the anniversary of the death of her father, that she would fall apart. She just stopped and she remembered how wonderful a man he was. What a great guy he was. But he still in heaven. And I thought to myself at that time, oh, I wish I could have that kind of faith. Oh, I wish I could have that kind of hope in the midst of the trial. This past April, when Mom died, I watched my family as we struggled through all of the sickness and going into all of this. I listened to the preacher and to my brother as they stood and gave the eulogy. They began to talk about Mom and lessons that they learned about Mom. You want to know what? It was a sad event because my mom was no longer with us. But it was a happy event because I could see her again. Now just sat back and I just watched these families. That's you. As you go through difficulties and struggles, that you can come and say, I know how it is. Because I know how it is. All is well. And as the world looks at us, you probably will never be any greater of a witness than when we are going through the deepest and darkest trials. Because when the world goes through that, they fall apart. They have no hope. And when they see us, enduring trials, even for just a small system, they look and say, what's the reason? And they can point to such a wonderful Savior. They can say his name is Jesus. How do we endure trials? Keep looking. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for the brief moment that we've had today in this glorious chapter of Romans 8. Father, I pray that as we continue to learn more about you, that our relationship will grow so strong and so deep and so intimate with you, that come what may, we look to the heavens, for that's our source of hope. That's our source of help. Father, I pray for Christians that are going through difficult times, even this moment, that are facing surgeries, doctor visits, they're facing the trials of life. Father, I pray this morning that we would not be crushed under by the devastating suffering that we face. Father, may our perspective be looking towards you. Not just simply because we can, but because there's a world that's watching. Father, when they see the hope that we have within us, may we be able to give an answer, a reason of why we have hope in dark days. Father, I pray that this morning, we as a church would be pointing men and women, boys and girls to you. Father, I pray this week that we will be ever vigilant to be your ambassadors, your witnesses to a lost world that has no hope. And Father, when they look at us, may they see Jesus. Your heads bowed with your eyes closed this morning. I just ask you, how do you handle suffering? What's your perspective on trials? Are you going through one now? If not, brace yourself. There's one on the horizon. How will you deal with it? With confidence and faith in Jesus? Or will you be crushed under? I guess the question that I'm asking is, who do you put your faith in? Maybe you're here this morning and you say, Scott, as I stop and think, my faith is placed on thee. My faith is in who I am, what I do. Maybe you're here this morning and just simply don't know Christ. I pray that today will be the day of salvation. The church family, as we suffer together, I pray that we will be faithful in our ministry to each other, building each other up, encouraging each other, pushing each other forward in faith. I pray that the way in which we live, in good times and in bad times, will be a life worth emulation. A life that's an example to others. And that we would draw each other closer to the Lord. Maybe this morning we need to come and say, Lord, I'm struggling. Lord, it hurts. But I don't really understand. But I want to give it all to you. I want to trust in you and you alone. I want to live my life with the confident assurance of the hope. Father, we stop before you this morning and we pray. We confess to you that in many ways our faith is so small. That, Father, so often we question your goodness and your wisdom. God, I pray this morning that as we get a proper perspective on suffering, that we would learn to look to you. God, I pray for those that are hurting this morning. Not that you would give to us all of the answers as to why, but that you would give to us the answers of how. How do we deal with the issue of hurt? Father, I pray for our church family, that we would be faithful ministers to each other. God, I pray for our church family that we would be faithful witnesses. Thank you so much for your word. With your heads bowed and with your eyes closed, I'm going to invite you to stand to your feet.